The day my daughter-in-law looked me in the eye and said, "This property isn't yours anymore, Lawrence. You should be grateful we're even letting you stay here." I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I just nodded, slowly, and walked back to my workshop in the garage. And I smiled, not because I was weak, not because I agreed with her, but because I already knew something she didn't. My name is Lawrence Beaumont. I'm 60. 4 years old. I spent 31 years building a small but solid lumber and hardware business in Kelowna, British Columbia. Nothing flashy. Just honest work, honest timber, honest dealings with contractors and farmers and families who needed materials to build something real. I raised 2 kids in a house I built myself on a 2-acre property on the east side of town, with a view of Okanagan Lake that I never once took for granted. My wife, Patricia, passed away 6 years ago. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, gone within 8 months. She was 57. After she died, I was the kind of man who kept the porch light on out of habit, even though I was the only one coming home. My son, Ryan, was 31 when Patricia died. He'd been living in Vancouver for a few years by then, working in some kind of tech sales job he never fully explained to me. He came home for the funeral, stayed 2 weeks, and then went back. I understood. Life moves fast when you're young. I didn't hold it against him. What I didn't see coming was Cassandra. Ryan met her about a year after Patricia died. He brought her home for Thanksgiving, tall, sharp-dressed, confident in a way that filled every room before she even spoke. She worked in real estate. "Commercial properties," she said. "Land development, rezoning, that kind of thing." I remember shaking her hand and thinking she had a firm grip and careful eyes. I should have paid more attention to the eyes. For the first year, she was perfectly pleasant to me. Complimented the property. Asked good questions about the lumber business. Seemed genuinely curious about how I'd built it. I thought she was just an intelligent, ambitious young woman who happened to love my son. I was glad for him. After everything we'd been through with losing Patricia, I wanted Ryan to be happy. They got married in the summer, 2 years after they met. Small ceremony on a vineyard outside of town. I paid for most of it. Not because anyone asked, but because I wanted to. Patricia would have wanted to see Ryan married. I did it for her, and I did it for him. That's when things started to shift, slowly. The way a crack in a foundation starts, you don't see it happening. You just notice one day that the wall isn't quite straight anymore. Cassandra began dropping ideas. Casual, over dinner, the way you'd mentioned the weather. "You know, Lawrence, this land is worth a lot more than what you've been treating it as." Or, "Have you ever thought about what would happen to the business when you retire? You don't want it to get complicated." Little suggestions, small nudges. I'd nod and change the subject and think nothing of it, but they weren't casual. I know that now. About 18 months into the marriage, Ryan came to me with a proposal. Cassandra had been in contact with a development firm out of Calgary, a company called Terrain Capital. They were looking at Okanagan Valley properties for a mixed-use residential project. Hotels, condos, commercial space, big money. Ryan told me they'd assessed my 2 acres and business property. I owned the land the lumber yard sat on, about 4 acres on the edge of town, and together they were valued at somewhere around $3.4 million. Ryan said Cassandra had a plan to structure a family land trust that would protect the assets from probate, reduce estate taxes, and position everything for development while keeping it technically in the family. He said it was smart planning. He said Patricia would have wanted to be practical about these things. He said a lot of things. I was 62 at the time. My knees hurt in the mornings. I'd been thinking about easing out of the business for a couple of years. I didn't want to fight. I trusted my son, and Cassandra had presented everything so clearly, in such careful language, with so many reassurances, that I signed the documents at a notary in downtown Kelowna on a Tuesday afternoon in March without fully understanding what I had agreed to. I want to be honest about that. I'm not a foolish man, but I was tired, and I was lonely, and I made a mistake. The family land trust put the property and business assets under a management structure that named Ryan and Cassandra as co-trustees. I was listed as a beneficiary. The notary explained it as standard language. I thought I understood it. I didn't. Not fully. Not what it would mean in practice. Within 3 months, Cassandra had brought in a property management company to assess the operational efficiency of the lumber yard. Within 6 months, she had quietly begun discussions with Terrain Capital, using my land as a leveraged asset for a development partnership. I found out about none of this as it was happening. What I did notice was smaller things. My name was no longer on the business bank account. Ryan said it was just restructured as part of the trust. The contractor I'd worked with for 11 years called me, confused, saying someone from a management company had told him his invoices would now need to go through a new approval process. My longtime employee, a man named Greg who'd worked the yard with me for 9 years, told me quietly one afternoon that he'd been asked to report operational decisions to Cassandra's assistant in Vancouver. I asked Ryan about it. He told me not to worry. He said Cassandra was just helping things run more efficiently. He said I should relax and enjoy having less responsibility. I remember standing in my workshop that evening, looking at the tools on the wall, Patricia's father's hand plane, my old Makita drill, the level I'd used to frame this house, and feeling something I hadn't felt since Patricia died. Not grief, exactly, something colder, the feeling of being handled. I called my old friend Bill Tran. We'd gone to high school together, lost touch for years, reconnected at a mutual friend's retirement party. Bill had spent his career as a commercial real estate lawyer in Penticton. I told him what had happened. I told him about the trust, about the documents I'd signed, about what was happening at the yard. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Lawrence," he said, "can you send me copies of everything you signed?" I could. I'd kept the copies in a file folder in my desk, the way Patricia always insisted we keep important documents. I used to tease her about it. All her organized folders and labeled envelopes. I thought about her the whole drive to the post office. Bill called me back 4 days later. "Okay," he said. "First thing I want you to do is not say anything to Ryan or Cassandra about this conversation." He explained it to me carefully. The trust documents I'd signed were legal. That was the hard part, but they had been drafted in a way that concentrated decision-making authority almost entirely with the co-trustees, with beneficiary rights that were largely passive. I had not been adequately advised of the practical implications. In Bill's opinion, there were grounds to argue I hadn't given fully informed consent, particularly given that the notary had not explained the scope of trustee authority in plain language, and the fact that the document had been prepared by a lawyer hired by Cassandra's firm, not independently by me. There was also something else. Bill had a contact at a commercial registry who owed him a favor. Through that contact, he'd found that Terrain Capital had already filed preliminary development applications, using my land as a listed asset in a partnership agreement. An agreement that bore what appeared to be my signature on a Schedule C addendum I had absolutely no memory of signing. I sat down when he told me that. My kitchen suddenly felt very quiet. "Bill," I said, "what do I do?" "You do nothing that lets them know you know," he said, "and you let me start making some calls. I want to tell you what those next few months were like, because I think people imagine that when you're fighting something like this, it feels dramatic. It doesn't. It feels exhausting and invisible. I went to the yard every morning the same as always. I said good morning to Greg. I drank my coffee. I made small talk with Ryan on the phone twice a week. I sat across from Cassandra at Sunday dinners and passed the salad and asked about her work. I was 62 years old, and I was the most careful I had ever been in my life. Bill was building a case quietly. He'd engaged a forensic documents examiner to look at the Schedule C addendum, the one with my supposed signature. He'd retained a trust litigation specialist in Kelowna, a woman named Meredith Park, who had experience with exactly this kind of elder financial abuse case. That's what she called it, the first time we met in her office. Elder financial abuse. I'd always thought that phrase applied to other people who were more vulnerable than me. The forensic examiner's report came back 6 weeks later. The signature on the Schedule C addendum was not mine. The pen pressure was wrong. The letter formation didn't match my exemplars. It had been fabricated. That was the moment everything changed, though nobody knew it yet except me and Bill and Meredith. Meredith filed an application with the BC Supreme Court to have the trust set aside on the grounds of undue influence, inadequate independent legal advice, and fraudulent misrepresentation. At the same time, Bill contacted the RCMP Commercial Crime Section with the forensic report. The forged signature on a legal land document was a criminal matter, separate from the civil case. We served the documents on a Thursday morning. I remember it was raining, that soft gray Kelowna rain in October that smells like lake water and pine. Ryan called me 40 minutes after the papers were delivered to their Vancouver address. His voice was very tight. "Dad, what is this?" "It's a legal filing." "Ryan, Cassandra says this is a misunderstanding. She says you didn't understand what you were signing and now you're Ryan." I kept my voice even. "There's a document with my signature on it that I did not sign. A forensic examiner has confirmed that. I think you need to talk to a lawyer. Your own lawyer, not hers." He hung up. That was the hardest moment of this whole thing. Not the documents, not the fraud, not the legal proceedings. It was the sound of my son hanging up the phone. He was 35 years old, and I still remembered teaching him to ride a bike in the driveway, and now we were here. I sat in my kitchen for a long time after that. What happened in the following months moved faster than I expected, once it started moving. Terrain Capital, when they became aware of the legal proceedings and the RCMP investigation, immediately distanced themselves from Cassandra and the partnership agreement. Their lawyers sent a letter clarifying they had relied on representations made by a third party and were not aware of any dispute regarding land ownership or document authenticity. In simpler terms, they ran. The BC Supreme Court granted an emergency preservation order within 2 weeks of our application, freezing any transactions involving the trust assets. Cassandra's firm in Vancouver. I found out during discovery that it wasn't just her personally, but a small company she operated, was compelled to produce all communications related to the land trust and the Terrain Capital negotiations. Those emails were something. I won't go through all of it because it would take hours, but what they showed was a deliberate, methodical plan that had begun before Ryan and Cassandra were even married. She had identified my property through land registry records, assessed its development value, identified me as a widower with a single heir, and begun a strategy of relationship access. There were emails between Cassandra and a business partner of hers, a man named Todd, who was apparently her former colleague from her early real estate days, in which she described my land as the Kelowna asset and referred to me as the father-in-law situation. Like I was a complication to be managed. Ryan saw those emails too. I don't know exactly what that did to him. I only know what he told me later, after the proceedings were mostly concluded, that he hadn't known about Todd, hadn't known about the plan before the marriage, and that he'd been, in his own way, deceived as well, used as the access point. I believe him. I have chosen to believe him, not because it's easy but because he's my son, and because I saw his face when he read those emails, and it wasn't the face of someone performing shock. Cassandra and Todd were charged by the RCMP with fraud over $5,000 and forgery. Those charges took time to work through the system. These things always do. But they were ultimately dealt with through a combination of guilty pleas and a negotiated resolution. Cassandra received a conditional sentence and was ordered to make financial restitution. Todd, who had played a more active role in preparing the fraudulent documents, received a period of incarceration. Cassandra's real estate license was revoked by the BC Financial Services Authority. The civil case was resolved through a court-approved settlement. The trust was set aside. The properties were returned to my sole name. Terrain Capital, as part of untangling the mess, agreed to a settlement payment to cover a portion of my legal costs. It wasn't everything. Legal proceedings are expensive and slow, and they take something out of you that money doesn't fully replace. But I got my land back. I got the yard back. I got Greg back. He'd never actually left, just been quietly confused and loyal, the way some people are. I want to tell you about the day I walked back into the lumberyard after everything was resolved. It was a Wednesday in February, cold and clear, one of those winter days in Kelowna where the sky is so blue it almost hurts. Greg was in the back, running inventory. He looked up when I came in, and he didn't say anything dramatic. He just nodded and said, "Morning, Lawrence," like I'd never been gone. Like we were just two people who worked together, and that was the whole of it. I stood there in the yard for a moment. The smell of cut wood and cold air, the sound of the forklift running somewhere in the back, and I thought about Patricia, about how she kept every document in labeled folders, about how she used to say, "Lawrence, you trust people too easily." I'd always thought it was a mild criticism. Now I understood it was protection. She was always trying to protect me, even in the small things, even in the ways I didn't recognize until she was gone. I thought about Ryan too. He and I have been talking. It's not easy. There are things I said and things I didn't say, and things that need more time. But he's my son. He made a terrible mistake in who he trusted, and he paid for it in ways that weren't always visible. We're working on it. I won't pretend it's simple or that it doesn't still hurt on certain evenings. But I haven't given up on him, and I don't think he's given up on me. The workshop in my garage still has all the tools on the wall. Patricia's father's hand plane, my old Makita drill, the level I used to frame this house 33 years ago. Some things you hold on to. Some things no one can take from you, no matter how carefully they plan. I'm Lawrence Beaumont. I'm 64 years old. I built something real, and I kept it. And if you're watching this from somewhere quiet tonight, maybe you're sitting in a kitchen you've lived in for a long time. Maybe someone has made you feel like what you built doesn't matter anymore, like what you have isn't yours to protect. I want you to know. It is. It still is. And it's not too late to act like it. Also, tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I'd love to know.